Morning, everyone. My name is Nerina, and I am a Ph.D. student at the University of Granada. I'm very glad to be here today at this wonderful conference, and I will be talking about the current debate on sexism in Spanish and Chinese languages. First, I'm going to talk about a story from David Foster Wallace. Uh, One old fish is just swimming around and he bumps into two younger fish and he says, "Morning, boys, how's the water?" And the two younger fish say, "What the hell is water?" So this water could be an analogy of this society and how sexism is so inherent to our behaviors that usually we just don't notice. So what is sexism in language? Well, sexist language is language that expresses bias in favor of one sex and thus treats the other sex in a discriminatory manner. This is quite obvious, obviously, and usually the uh, discriminated sex is female. This practice can make women invisible in language and altogether can exclude them. So we are arguing about the necessity of a language reform that we are going to tackle later. And some feminist theorists have generally assumed that language is not a neutral and transparent means of representing reality. So we're going to talk about Spanish language. As you probably know, Spanish is a Romanic language. As you can see, there are other Romanic languages such as French, Italian, Portuguese. Thus, it has gender flexion, that is, we have masculine and feminine, and the 15% of the world languages have this division. So, as language influence thought, uh, even after the grammatical genders of nouns are learned, language may influence thought during thinking for speaking. For example, we've seen that we have gender in Spanish, that is, for an object, we are going to say either if it's masculine or feminine. All the objects have a gender assigned, usually randomly. So we're going to see some experiments on how this gender may influence how we think about this object. For example, we have one experiment about description. We have a key, for example, which is masculine in German and feminine in Spanish. A group of German people will say that these keys are hard, heavy, jagged, metal, and useful. But Spanish people will say that they're golden, intricate, little, lovely, and tiny. And the same goes with bridge, but the other way around. We also have some pictures, as we've seen before. The bridge in German is feminine and in Spanish is masculine. They needed with these pictures to relate them with a boy or a girl. And as we can see, most German people will relate a bridge with a girl, and in Spanish, most people will relate a bridge with a boy. And the other way around with the keys. Also, they did an experiment about memory. A group of German people and Spanish people, they all have this apple, and this apple was given the name of either Patrick or Patricia, and they discovered that German people would memorize better the name Patrick for the apple because it's masculine in German, and Patricia in Spanish. So some conclusions on the matter are that people's thinking about objects can be influenced by aspects of grammar that differ across languages, as we've seen before. And it is really interesting that even a fluke of grammar can have an effect on how people think about things in the world. So sexism is not inherent to languages as a system, but roots in some consolidated and accepted uses shown as correct by the community of speakers. So the language is not really sexist, but us, and we have these behaviors, this sexist behavior that roots into the language. So what about Chinese language? Is it neutral or not? Well, in Chinese, unlike Spanish, as we've seen before, they don't have a gender flexion. So it is interesting to see these dyads that Moser pointed out. We have these pairs for man, man, woman, husband, wife, son, daughter that are the same in most languages. So why usually well, there is one exception that is yin yang, where the female component goes first, but why the woman usually has like the less important or less typical slot in these dyads, these pairs. It for Given that women have been conceptually viewed by most societies as less important, then becomes natural, we would say, for native speakers to accord them to the second place in such dyads. This follows the cognitive models like the pairs up down or good bad, that usually the second part is the negative one. So women in Chinese writing, we have the character for woman that is usually used as a radical for other characters such as mother, sister, aunt, and also in some bad words, we would say, like jealousy, suspicion, slave, devil, or rape. But also in some good ones, such as good or safety. But even these characters are stereotypes because, as we can see in good, we have the woman, the mother, with the child, and safety, a woman under a roof. And the radical itself is thought to derive from an image of a woman bending over with her hands clasped together, as we are going to see later. And the word for man, by contrast, is made up by the radicals of field and power. So here's the two pictures, one with the female character and the other one with the masculine character. So all in all, can we reform a language? We've said before that it is important to reform language in order to make it less sexist. So, while sexist language clearly reflects sexist social structures, the continuing existence of such social structures throws into question the possibility of successful language reform. That is, if a society is sexist, as we said before, it's just us, not really the language. So a reform is going to be successful or not. So therefore, in the interests of accuracy, we should strive to conclude the female half of the human race by replacing male terms with neutral ones. This is what Cameron says on the matter. But what's the problem with the neutral concepts? The introduction of neutral and non-sexist terms does not guarantee neutral and or non-sexist usage. Because, as we said before, it's not really that we need to change always the language, but also how to tackle to the society so we learn to be less sexist. So this is quite obvious, but when a language reform occurs within the context of a larger socio-political initiative whose primary goal is the eradication of sexist practices, it is more likely to succeed. Whereas the other way around, it is less likely to succeed, obviously. So, steps to achieve a language reform. First, we need to reach a consensus in the innovative speech community. Second, develop non-sexist language guidelines. And third, have the support of a speech community. Some strategies that we've seen in Spanish, for example, are using the slash. Some people will say that this is unpleasant for the eye, or using the X or the at instead of the vowel that tells the gender, but that's disruptive and does not belong to the alphabet, so it could be somehow problematic. The best option, it seems to be the vowel E at the end to mark a neutral gender. It has been very interesting what Gabriela Cabezón Cámara says about this reform. that the disruptive and what disturbs us is precisely what attracts our attention on the gender problem, which is actually what language wants to manifest. So it would be even a positive thing to have something that is disruptive or shocking somehow. I would like to talk about this project, which I find wonderful, truly. It's called Women's Words, and it's kind of a dictionary. It's designed by the Malaysian design collective called Typokaki, and they take some words, Chinese words, and they add the female radical, or they change them a little bit to create words that reflect the women's experience all in all. So, for example, we have the character for hair, and they add the radical of female or woman, and that that would be that a woman can be hairy, for example, or with the pain they add the radical for woman, and that would convey the menstrual pain specifically. So that is really interesting. We have here some examples. And what about changing Chinese language, which seems at first more complicated than Spanish? We can see some examples of some characters that have already been changed. For example, the character for you, ni, in Chinese, we can already see the other version with the female radical. And some people will say, well, the character for you already had a generic radical for person, which is this character Ren. But we actually have the binomial ta, which is he or him or her, depending on. Sorry, it would be he or she, depending on the radical we choose. So, in fact, Moser adds that experiments show that readers tend to identify the referent for generic masculine pronouns as male, not neutral. So it wouldn't be really neutral. That's why this character is becoming more and more used among the female collective. So some conclusions about this presentation. Surely real hope lies in the possibility of conscious challenge to the generally accepted ways of speaking, thinking, and categorizing. And Moser thinks that cross-cultural comparisons are especially helpful in this regard, since they tend to suggest projected domains less obvious within one linguistic system. In addition, with the increasing cultural and scientific exchange between China and the West, there is no reason why the international community of scholars cannot begin to address such issues collectively. This is really important, and that is why I think that we should tackle all this matter, not only language by language, but like all together, because we have some issues that could be handled in all the languages, because I think sexism is something that we can see in more than one language. So, as Moser also says, given that both cultures share the same kinds of historical gender inequities towards men, it would seem appropriate that we work together in analyzing these problems and hopefully opening the door to solutions. And I think that's very important that we open the door, as Moser says, to more solutions, and hopefully we can eradicate in the future the sexism in language. So that could be it. Thank you very much for your attention, for attending today. And this would be my contact, my mail. If someone wants to write something, to write me and ask any question or any suggestion, I would be very glad to answer them. Thank you very much.